The sun, a relentless forge in the Arizona sky, beat down on the vast, untamed landscape, turning the very air into a shimmering mirage. Jedediah, Jed Stone, a man whose character was as rugged and unyielding as the land he sought to tame, rode his sturdy roan mare, Blaze, across his isolated ranchland. His days were a ceaseless cycle of mending fences, tending to his small herd of longhorns, and battling the unforgiving elements. Every creak of his worn leather saddle, every gust of wind rustling through the sun-baked mesquite was a familiar note in the quiet symphony of his solitary life. Jed was known in the few scattered settlements not for grand pronouncements, but for his quiet integrity and an indomitable will forged by years of hardship. His ranch, a cluster of sun-bleached wood and corrugated iron nestled deep in a secluded valley, was his sanctuary and his burden. Today, however, an unnatural hush clung to the air, a stillness that pressed down on him with an almost physical weight. It was late afternoon, the sun beginning its slow descent, when Jed first caught sight of it, a thin, dark ribbon of smoke unfurling against the vast, cloudless expanse of the sky. It rose from beyond the familiar contours of his property, too dense and too concentrated to be a natural fire, and carried a faint, unsettling aroma he couldn't quite place. A prickle of unease, a cold premonition, tightened in Jed's gut. His hand instinctively brushed the smooth, worn grip of his Colt single-action army, a silent companion holstered at his hip. He was a man who preferred to avoid trouble, but the unnaturalness of the smoke gnawed at him. He nudged Blaze into a faster trot, the mare's hooves stirring plumes of fine red dust, carrying him towards an unforeseen destiny that would shatter the carefully constructed solitude of his existence. As Jed drew nearer, the smell intensified, a nauseating blend of burning wood and something else sharp and metallic, like scorched earth and desperation. He dismounted carefully at the crest of a low, rocky rise, leaving Blaze tethered to a resilient, wind-sculpted juniper. Below him, the scene unfolded with a stark, horrifying clarity that burned into his memory. A small, crude dwelling, little more than a lean-to fashioned from salvaged timber and canvas, was a roaring inferno, its flames devouring everything in their path, spitting angry sparks into the deepening twilight. But his gaze was immediately drawn to the ancient, gnarled mesquite tree, standing a short distance from the blaze. Tied to its trunk, her hands bound tightly with thick, chafing rawhide thongs, stood a young woman. Her long dark hair was disheveled, and her traditional buckskin dress, though torn and dirtied, spoke of her Apache heritage. Fear had etched itself onto her face, stretching her features taut, and her wide dark eyes, reflecting the flickering inferno, were filled with a raw, primal terror as she watched her home consume itself. Her head snapped up, her desperate gaze sweeping the shadows, then locking onto Jed. A ragged gasp escaped her lips, a fragile sound against the roar of the fire. "Please, please believe me," she choked out, her voice raspy, thick with an accent and a profound urgency. "Spirit told me you'd save me tonight." The words, unexpected and laced with a mystical plea, hung in the smoke-filled air, striking Jed with a force that transcended the harsh realities of the frontier. He felt a rare surge of profound empathy, overriding his ingrained caution. Jed's mind raced, grappling with the profound implications of her plea and the fraught history between settlers and the Apache. He was acutely aware of the perilous path he was considering. Aiding an Apache, especially one who appeared to be a fugitive, could bring severe repercussions, staining his own reputation and possibly jeopardizing his ranch. Yet the woman's raw vulnerability, the obvious injustice of her situation, and the sheer desperation in her eyes resonated deeply within his quiet, principled soul. His own past, marked by loss and the harsh hand of fate, had taught him the fragility of life and the profound importance of human kindness, however rare. He simply could not turn away. Steeling his resolve, Jed moved cautiously down the slope, his boots crunching on loose gravel. His hand remained near his Colt, not as a sign of aggression, but as a silent testament to his awareness of the constant danger that lurked in this territory. "Who did this to you?" he asked, his voice low and even, designed to calm rather than alarm. The woman flinched, her eyes widening, but then a desperate flicker of hope ignited within them. "Rangers. They said I helped my brother," she stammered, her words tumbling out in a rush, punctuated by ragged sobs. He took horses. They burned our home, tied me here to watch." Her fragmented explanation painted a grim, all-too-common picture of frontier brutality. Jed saw the angry red chafing on her wrists, the genuine terror in her eyes, the stark reality of her plight. He drew his well-worn Bowie knife from its leather sheath, the steel blade glinting ominously in the flickering light of the dying fire. "Hold still," he instructed, his tone firm but undeniably gentle. He knelt beside her, his movements precise and careful, and began to saw through the thick, resistant rawhide, acutely aware of the delicate skin beneath. As the last, stubborn strand of rawhide finally gave way, releasing her bound wrists, Nalinle, for that was her name, a whisper later given, sagged against the mesquite tree, a shaky breath escaping her lips. The profound relief was almost palpable. Jed resheathed his knife, his gaze sweeping the immediate vicinity, his ears straining for any sound beyond the hiss and pop of the dying embers. "What's your name?" he asked again, his voice softer now, almost a murmur. "Nalinle," she whispered, rubbing her raw, aching wrists, then added, her voice thick with gratitude, "Thank you, rancher." Jed nodded curtly. "Jed Stone, we need to get out of here. Whoever did this might come back." He gestured towards Blaze, patiently waiting uphill, her silhouette a dark, comforting shape against the fading light. Nalinle's eyes, still reflecting the orange glow of the smouldering ruins, filled with a deep, profound sorrow as she looked at what remained of her home. My things, my memories," she murmured, her voice barely audible, a mournful lament for what was lost. "They're gone," Jed said, his voice imbued with a quiet understanding of such profound loss, a sentiment born from his own past. "Survival is what matters now. We have to move." He extended a hand, strong and calloused, offering her a steadying grip as she struggled to her feet, her legs stiff from her ordeal. She hesitated for only a moment, then placed her small, trembling hand in his, a fragile connection made. With a shared glance, an unspoken acknowledgement of the perilous journey that stretched before them, Jed helped her mount Blaze, settling her carefully behind him. As she leaned into him, her small frame a fragile weight against his back, Jed turned the mare and urged her into a steady canter, leaving the acrid scent of smoke and the ghosts of a shattered life behind them, swallowed by the vast, encroaching darkness of the desert night. They rode through the long, silent hours of the night, a singular symbiotic unit against the vast indifference of the desert. Jed kept a vigilant eye on their back trail, his senses heightened, attuned to every whisper of the wind, every rustle of dry brush, wary of any sound that might signal pursuit. Nalinle remained quiet behind him, her small presence a constant reassuring weight against his back, a tangible reminder of the extraordinary circumstances that had bound them together. The desert, a place Jed had always experienced as one of profound, sometimes overwhelming solitude, now felt different, imbued with a new, shared vulnerability. As the first faint streaks of grey and rose began to paint the eastern sky, announcing the arrival of another scorching day, Jed guided Blaze into a hidden alcove within a small, rugged canyon. Its high, sheer walls of rust-colored rock offered a valuable degree of concealment and a brief respite from the relentless elements. "We'll rest here for a few hours," Jed announced, his voice low and a little hoarse from the dust and the long ride. He dismounted with practiced ease and helped Nalinle down, watching as she stretched her stiff, aching limbs, wincing slightly as she moved her raw wrists. He pulled his worn canteen from the saddlebag and offered it to her, then produced some dried jerky and a few pieces of hardtack, meager provisions for two. Nalinle accepted the offerings gratefully, her hunger evident in the hurried, almost desperate way she ate and drank. They sat in silence, sharing the sparse meal, the only sounds the soft snorts of Blaze as she grazed on sparse tufts of grass and the distant, haunting cry of a hawk circling high above. In the quiet solitude of the canyon, under the watchful eyes of the ancient rock formations, a fragile seed of trust began to sprout between them, unspoken yet profoundly felt in the shared vulnerability and the gradual easing of the tension in Nalinle's slender shoulders. After a few precious hours of fitful rest, with the sun now a scorching orb high in the cloudless sky, Jed knew they couldn't linger in the canyon. They still had a considerable distance to cover to reach the relative safety and concealment of his ranch. The terrain remained relentlessly unforgiving, a labyrinth of rocky washes, thorny scrub, and steep, sun-baked inclines. Yet Nalinle, despite her recent ordeal and exhaustion, moved with an inherent grace and resilience that consistently impressed Jed. She possessed an intimate, almost innate knowledge of the land, honed by a lifetime spent navigating its harsh beauty. She pointed out faint game trails that Jed might have missed, identified edible plants and vital water sources where he saw only barren rock, and even warned him of approaching dust storms long before he felt the first stirrings of wind. Her deep connection to the desert a stark contrast to Jed's more practical, utilitarian understanding. As they pressed on, the initial wary silence between them began to break, replaced by tentative words, then hesitant questions, evolving into a quiet exchange. Nalinle, her English improving with each interaction, asked about Jed's life on the ranch, the demanding rhythm of his solitary existence, and the profound differences between his world and her own. Jed, in turn, found himself increasingly drawn to her quiet strength, her deep wisdom, and her unwavering spirit, listening intently as she spoke of her tribe's ancient traditions, their intricate spiritual beliefs, and the deep communal bonds that defined her people. He learned her Apache name, which she explained meant always walking, a fitting name for someone so resilient and connected to the land. They were two individuals from vastly disparate worlds, brought together by an act of desperation and a shared journey for survival, slowly but surely bridging the cultural chasm between them with each shared mile and every exchanged word. The journey to Jed's ranch stretched into 2 long, grueling days and equally taxing nights. They endured the searing, dehydrating heat of the desert day, where the air itself seemed to shimmer, and the biting chill of the desert night when temperatures plummeted drastically. They navigated through treacherous, bone-dry arroyos and over unforgiving rocky hills, constantly vigilant, their eyes scanning the vast horizon for any sign of pursuit. Along the way, Jed meticulously tended to Nalinle's raw and chafed wrists, using clean strips of cloth from his saddlebag and what little precious water he could spare from his canteen to soothe the angry skin. He found himself sharing more of his own past than he had with anyone in years. The quiet, profound tragedy of losing his wife and young child years ago, the crushing loneliness that had driven him to this isolated existence, building walls around his heart. Nalinle, in turn, reciprocated, opening up about her own family, the strength and unity of her community, and the deep spiritual connection her people held with the very earth beneath their feet. She spoke of her brother, a wild, impulsive spirit whose actions, though born of desperation, had inadvertently brought this tragedy upon her. These moments of shared vulnerability, born out of necessity and the intimacy of their shared struggle against the elements and unseen threats, wove an intricate, unbreakable thread between them, blurring the rigid lines of settler and Apache, stranger and rescuer. Finally, as the sun began its slow, majestic descent on the second day, painting the vast sky in fiery hues of orange and purple, the familiar, comforting sight of Jed's small, unpretentious ranch house appeared on the horizon, a beacon of weary hope, a promise of a fragile sanctuary in the vast, unforgiving expanse of the Arizona Territory. Reaching the ranch brought with it a profound sense of weary relief, a temporary respite from the relentless fear and the arduous journey. However, Jed knew their troubles were far from over. Harboring an Apache woman, especially one sought by the local authorities and prejudiced factions, was a perilous undertaking in this territory. The ranch, while isolated, offered no true immunity from the long arm of the law or the pervasive, often brutal prejudice of the era. Jed led Nalinle into his small, functional cabin, a place of bare necessities and quiet, echoing memories. He provided her with fresh, cool well water, a luxury after their days of rationing, and a change of clothes, a simple, worn cotton dress that had belonged to his late wife, a poignant reminder of the life he once had, now shared with an unexpected guest. His immediate priority was to ensure her recovery and safety, giving her space to heal. Over the next few days, an uneasy yet surprisingly peaceful routine settled over the ranch. Jed continued his demanding daily chores, mending weathered fences, tending to his small herd of cattle with practiced efficiency, and maintaining a constant watchful eye on the distant plains for any unwelcome visitors. Nalinle, recovering physically from her ordeal, spent her days quietly. She observed Jed's methodical work, his quiet dedication to his land, and his unexpected, tender compassion. She helped with small tasks where she could, her movements fluid and efficient, showing a natural adaptability. They spoke little of the harrowing incident that had brought them together, but the unspoken understanding between them deepened with each shared meal, each quiet moment in the vast open silence. Jed began to notice Nalinle's quiet dignity, her profound respect for the natural world, and a deep-seated strength that mirrored his own. Nalinle, in turn, recognized Jed's unwavering integrity, his silent resilience, and the unexpected tenderness that lay beneath his rugged frontier exterior. Their fragile, uneasy peace, a quiet rhythm established over days of shared meals and unspoken understanding, was abruptly, brutally shattered one sweltering afternoon. The sun beat down, turning the air into a shimmering, oppressive blanket when Jed first saw it, a rising cloud of dust on the horizon. It wasn't the small, familiar plume of a lone rider, nor the scattered trail of a few stray cattle. This was a dark, purposeful column, churning higher with each passing minute, announcing the unmistakable, ominous approach of trouble. Jed, who had been methodically sharpening an axe near his weathered woodpile, the rhythmic thud-scrape of stone against steel a familiar comfort, slowly straightened, his body tensing, his eyes narrowing into slits against the glare. His gut clenched with a cold premonition as he recognized the lead rider, even from a distance. It was Frank Miller, a hard-nosed, unforgiving rancher from a neighboring valley, a man infamous for his virulent anti-Apache sentiments and a temper as quick and unpredictable as a desert lightning strike. Miller wasn't alone. He was flanked by two other heavily armed men, their silhouettes grim and unyielding against the blinding light, a clear, unmistakable indication of their hostile intent. Jed's heart began to pound, a heavy, insistent rhythm against his ribs, a drumbeat of rising dread. He knew, with a chilling, absolute certainty that settled deep in his bones, exactly what they wanted. He didn't wait for them to reach his cabin. He met them out in the dusty yard, planting his feet firmly in the parched ground, adopting a stance of quiet defiance. His hand, subtly, almost imperceptibly, drifted to rest on the worn butt of his holstered Colt, a silent promise of resistance, should it come to that. The air hung thick with anticipation, the only sounds the creak of saddle leather and the heavy breathing of the horses as the riders pulled to a halt just a few yards from him. "Stone," Miller greeted, his voice rough and devoid of any warmth, cutting through the stifling heat like a rusty blade. His eyes, hard and shrewd, raked over Jed, assessing him. "We're looking for an Apache woman. Heard she was seen headed this way. Escaped from some rangers down south, they say. Word travels." Jed's jaw tightened, a muscle clenching beneath his tanned skin. He couldn't bring himself to lie outright. His deep-seated integrity, a core tenet of his character, simply wouldn't allow it. But he also couldn't willingly betray Nalinle, not after all they'd been through, not after the fragile trust that had grown between them. "I haven't seen anyone of that description," he stated, his voice calm and steady, a deliberate effort to betray nothing of the churning turmoil within him. His gaze remained locked with Miller's, unwavering. Miller's eyes, cold and sharp as flint, narrowed with suspicion. He glanced pointedly towards the cabin's closed door, then back at Jed. "You harboring her, Stone? That would be a mighty foolish thing to do," he drawled, his voice taking on a low, menacing quality. "Could put you on the wrong side of the law and your good neighbors. Folks around here don't take kindly to that kind of association. Don't want to be mistaken for a renegade lover, do you?" The unspoken threat hung heavy in the stifling air, thick and palpable, a testament to the dangerous prejudices and brutal realities of the era. Each word was a calculated jab, designed to provoke, to intimidate. Jed knew with a sinking, visceral feeling that this confrontation could erupt into violence at any second, a danger not just for him, but more terrifyingly, for the woman he had, against all expectations, come to protect. The silence that followed was charged, crackling with unspoken tension. The standoff stretched, each second elongated by the unspoken menace emanating from Miller's gaze, which relentlessly sought to penetrate Jed's resolve, searching for any flicker of weakness, any hint of deceit. But Jed's stance remained unyielding, rooted firmly in the dusty earth. His loyalty to Nalinle, forged in the crucible of their shared adversity and the quiet moments of nascent understanding, was now a bedrock of his character, a foundation that would not crack. Just as the air seemed to crackle with the impending threat of violence, as the two armed men flanking Miller shifted restlessly, their hands hovering near their holsters, the cabin door creaked open softly. Nalinle emerged. Her sudden, unexpected appearance visibly startled Miller and his men, momentarily catching them off guard. Their hard gazes flickered with surprise, their bodies tensing. But Nalinle didn't flinch. She stood tall, her slender frame imbued with an unexpected dignity, her head held high. Her dark eyes, usually so expressive, were now calm and resolute, meeting their hostile stares with an unyielding strength that seemed, if only for a fleeting moment, to disarm their aggression. She carried herself not as a captive or a victim, but as a person with agency and truth. In clear, remarkably steady English, her voice carrying a quiet power that resonated across the dusty yard and commanded their attention, she spoke. Her words were direct, cutting through the silence and the prejudice like a sharp stone. "I took no horses. My brother did. I was punished for his actions, and my home was burned to the ground for it." Her voice remained even, devoid of a tremor, filled only with the stark, unvarnished truth of her experience. Her words hung in the air, a direct, undeniable challenge to their assumptions, stripping away the dehumanizing label of the Apache woman and presenting her as an individual with her own story, her own suffering, her own undeniable humanity. Miller, clearly taken aback by her unexpected presence and articulate, resolute defense, studied her for a long, tense moment, his hardened expression unreadable. His gaze flickered from her to Jed, then back again. Finally he spoke. his voice surprisingly subdued, lacking its earlier bluster and venom. "That's your story, then." He paused, weighing her words, perhaps even a flicker of doubt entering his rigid worldview. He then shifted his gaze back to Jed, his eyes narrowed in a final, crucial test. "You vouch for her, Stone?" Jed met his stare unflinchingly, his voice firm and unwavering, leaving no room for doubt or hesitation. "I do." It was a simple statement, yet it carried the weight of everything they had endured, everything they had become to each other. Miller considered this for another silent, pregnant moment, his eyes searching Jed's, trying to find a lie, but there was none. Then, with a curt, almost begrudging nod to his men, he turned his horse. "Let's ride," he grunted, the order curt, dismissive. Without another word, he and his riders spurred their mounts, their boots kicking up fresh dust as they disappeared back into the shimmering heat haze from which they had emerged, swallowed by the vast, indifferent desert. As the dust settled, slowly descending back onto the parched earth, Jed let out a slow, steadying breath he hadn't realized he was holding, the profound tension finally easing from his shoulders. A wave of exhaustion washed over him, but it was accompanied by an even deeper surge of relief. He turned to Nalinle, a profound mixture of relief, admiration for her courage, and a burgeoning respect shining in his eyes. They had faced the threat together, their unlikely bond having seen them through a moment of extreme peril. The future in this unforgiving land remained profoundly uncertain, fraught with new challenges and the ever-present shadow of prejudice and misunderstanding. But in that moment, standing together on the dusty ground of Jed's ranch under the vast, indifferent sky, a profound sense of hope, fragile yet undeniably resilient, bloomed between them. Their shared ordeal had not only forged an unexpected connection, but had also initiated a path of mutual understanding and growth, promising a narrative far richer and more complex than either could have imagined in the heart of the Old West.